Advancement ICT, and my name is Lemiso Koyo. I'm a petroleum engineer from the National Oil Corporation of Kenya, and I'll be your moderator for this session. And we have our rapporteur, Ayan Omar, from National Oil Corporation of Kenya. And then we have three presenters. We have Mr. Alan Obalim, Mr. Amani Delo, and Mr. Manja Bogisevic. So the presenters will give an introduction about themselves and share their topic. So the estimation is that your presentation should be around 10 minutes, and then we prefer questions to be after all the presentations. Then we'll have a combined session for questions and answers. So I'd like to invite the first presenter, Mr. Alan Obalim. Welcome.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All right. I know after lunch, sometimes digestion is taking its effect. But yes, as my presentation comes up, my name is Obalim Alan. Just about me, I currently work for the Petroleum Authority of Uganda as a manager ICT. I've attained a few qualifications in this space of ICT. A bachelor's degree in computer science, 2 master's degree, one in information and network security, another in ICT management policy and architecture design, and then a professional digital program with the MIT, and that was in cybersecurity, dealing with policy, people, and technology. And lastly, economics of cybersecurity with the Delft University in Germany as well. I've also attained a few certifications in ITIL, AIM-CSA, the ISO, lead cybersecurity manager, lead privacy manager, and etc. So since I only have 10 minutes, we'll delve into the presentation. I'm going to be sharing about the oil and gas critical infrastructure and cybersecurity being a problem or a crisis. Yes, this is my agenda. We'll have introductions, we'll have some case studies regarding critical infrastructure. We'll also talk about cybersecurity to the oil and gas critical infrastructure, the challenges, some best practices, then regulatory framework in Uganda as a case study, and then we'll conclude. So the introduction, we'll go back to basics, first of all. Many times you've heard of the narrative of information security and cybersecurity. Now, the latter is a subset of the former. And according to NIST, information security is the protection of information and information systems to protect, from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, and destruction in order to provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are the tenets. And then we also have cybersecurity, which is a subset of information security. Ideally, this is a body of technologies, processes, and practices designed to protect your networks, your devices, your programs, your data from attacks and damage and unauthorized access. Then critical infrastructure, these are keywords that are going to guide the discussion. Critical infrastructure is a body of systems, networks, and assets that are so essential that their continued operation is required to ensure security of a given nation, its economy, and the public health and safety. Ideally, to summarize, anything that negatively impacts the socio-economic status is critical infrastructure. And of course, Uganda, oil and gas being a nascent industry, it's vital to really protect oil and gas because it's looked at as critical infrastructure, because it's aimed at supporting the economy and driving it to being a fast country in terms of economies of scale. And of course, we'll also recognize that in the past and also in the recent years, there have been several high-profile cyber threats or attacks on the oil and gas companies around the world. And some of these have resulted to financial losses and damage to reputational damage. There's a lot to talk about here, but the bottom line is that all these speak to three tenets, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But I also introduced to you other tenets which fall under the Parkerian hexad. That was defined by one gentleman respected in the security space called Don Parker, and it's called the Parkerian hexad. So it comes up with 6 tenets, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, possession, authenticity, and utility. And then the last 3, the proponents are the Makamba, and it's a cube. And they bring in the aspect of transmission, storage, and processing. And so the Parkerian hexad and the Makamba cube literally address security at the human element, because in the value chain, the human being is the weakest link. And then the original pillars speak to technology. Case studies. In 2012, Saudi Aramco was a victim of a cyber attack through the Shaman malware. And this malware spread in its network and actually wiped their data, and they were down. And in 2015, we had the Ukraine power grid. Between 2015 and 2016, there was the black energy malware that also ran down the Ukraine power grid, and it shut down power. And so it affected operations. And then in 2021, around May, we had the Colonial pipeline. My counterpart is going to discuss this as a case study, but this affected the eastern part of the USA, and it was as an effect of the ransomware. Now, ransomware is in 2 categories. You have the encryptors and you have the blockers. And so this shut down the pipelines, and it became a problem for the guys out there. And then we have the Iranian nuclear facility, the Natanz, which was because of the Stuxnet. And I think this was a state's affair between Israel, America, and Iran, which actually ran down the centrifuge system. It overran and then it collapsed. And that was the SCADA system. So the lessons we drive from here is that the experience of Saudi Aramco, Ukraine, and Iran show that cybersecurity attacks can actually cause physical damage and disruption to operations. It's a denial of service. While the attack on the Colonial pipeline demonstrates potential impact on the economy and society, because now it was a game of demand and supply. It was an inverse proportional. So some of the threats that are very eminent in this sector, or that the sector is vulnerable to, are things to do with malware. These take any forms like viruses, worms, name it, the ransomware. It's very common of late. And then social engineering attacks. Now this is just playing with your psychology. It's an attack on humans, and we have different employees that speak to social engineering. You have the phishing, you have the farming, you have the whaling. Of course, the whaling is an attack on top executives. Then you have the vishing, which is a voicemail attack. Then the smishing, which is an attack through your SMSs, your short messages. And ideally, all these are targeted to disrupt operations, compromise sensitive data, cause physical damage to equipment, even shut down production facilities. Cybersecurity in the oil and gas industry, of course, has far-reaching consequences beyond financial losses just. And these can also impact national security. Uganda currently, I think through the EACOP, is coming up with a pipeline from Hoima to Tanga. And it's critical because there's going to be lots of sensor networks, industrial control systems installed along this pipeline. These sensor networks have proprietary protocols which can be broken. And so it's very important that this is actually addressed, both the cyber and the physical. And this can actually lead to national security if not managed very well. And that's the rhetoric that we need to push as knowledge experts in this area. And therefore, industry must implement robust security measures to mitigate these risks. Some of the challenges in the industry, the biggest, of course, is that this industry presents very complex systems. Integrating your SCADA networks or your industrial control systems with your office or production networks. So it's complicated because you have different protocols trying to integrate and talk to each other. You're trying to process some real-time data, which can also be an opportunity for a malicious entity. So these are one of the challenges that critical infrastructure presents. And then, of course, the lack of sound cybersecurity strategies, policies, and procedures. Those are governance tools. And of course, that starts from above, the board or the ministers. Those should be driven at those levels. And then one other challenge is the lack of training or user awareness. Now, training is to impart knowledge on a scale, while awareness is to cause behavior change or attitude. These are very key because when you have a trained workforce, you're as good as good, because the weakest element in the security value chain is the human element. And so training is one area that actually plugs that. And then additionally, industry must contend with the evolving nature of cyber threats. We need to move with the times. Some best practices, of course, include conducting regular risk assessments to know where your weak points are and what opportunities you have. Developing comprehensive cyber security strategies, implementing multi-layered defense mechanisms, and also some technical controls like sinkholes, firewalls, IDSs, darknets, and etc. CM, SOAS, all these give you a more proactive ways of being on the offensive rather than being on the defensive. And then other best practices, of course, include training your employees, causing awareness, partnering with trusted vendors and service providers, and adopting industry-based standards like the ISO, standards like the PCI DSS for the financial sectors, the HIPAA for the health sectors, name it. Yeah, I'll just go to the next slide. In Uganda, for the case of Uganda, government of Uganda has recognized the importance of cybersecurity as a critical infrastructure, and several steps have been taken. For instance, we have the National Information Technology Authority of Uganda. This is the body that regulates IT. And they've come up with some guidelines, some standards regarding critical infrastructure. They have also come up with frameworks that address risks, incident responses, and compliance with international standards. I'll also want to say that there's also the National Information Security Policy and Strategy in place as governance tools. And then we have some laws in place like the Computer Misuse Act. We have the Data Protection and Privacy Act, the E-Signatures Act, all those to literally try and protect this space. In conclusion, cyber or information security is a critical issue that we always have to keep pushing. And given its importance in the economy of a country and its national security, it's only fair that industry faces the challenges that the industry faces in securing critical infrastructure should be able to adopt best practices while working with government, regulators, to better protect itself from cyber threats. And then, of course, government has a critical role in ensuring that the regulations it puts out are followed by the different players in the spaces. And of course, these include the private sector and any others. So there has to be a level of compliance that governments need to put in place. Then ultimately, security, the success of the oil and gas industry, not only in Uganda, definitely across the world, will depend on its ability to adapt to the changing threats and also stay, of course, way ahead of the attackers in this digital age. There's a small video here that I'm going to ask the tech team to just play for us. It's something that drives some sort of awareness. And this was gotten from the government of Dubai. Maybe you could take it back a bit. Since we've had lunch, this can be a small interlude to lighten us up.
Yo, man.
Hello?
Can you help? Alright. Our fellow email me, dear customer, there seems to be a payment issue. You need to send us your account number and we'll resolve it for you. How could I be so clumsy and click on the dubious link? All this time he was after my password and username.
Alternative center access to your data. Hackers and the frost is always lying in the waiter. You better watch your back, don't fall for the beta. Let's review the situation that you're caught up in. To be a safe player, you have to know how to play. If you say a moment, don't give them time of day. Never listen to a word when they say. And if they claim that they're the bank, tell them no way.
But he sent me a reminder.
It wasn't me.
Messaged me on WhatsApp.
It wasn't me.
He even called me in the shower.
It wasn't me.
He told me I won the lottery.
It wasn't me.
He asked me for my password.
It wasn't me.
To verify my account number.
It wasn't me.
I even sent him a picture.
It wasn't me.
He dreamed my account and it was over. Our fellow email me, dear customer, there seems to be a payment issue. You need to send us your account number and we'll resolve it for you. How could I be so clumsy and click on the dubious link? All this time he was after my password and username.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me.
Okay, the message here is that a fraudster will always ask for your personally identifiable information, and the bank will not. And so you need to safeguard your key information, things like your credit card numbers, your account numbers, and your passwords, and actually adopt multi-factor authentication. That way you'll be safe. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alan, for the presentation. So I think I'll request you, Mr. Alan, to sit here in preparation for the question as I welcome Amani Delo on stage. So after this, there will be a question and answer session. So please wait for your questions and welcome, Mr. Amani.
Good afternoon, everyone. As the moderator has introduced, my name is Amani Delo, and I work with the Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation. For those who don't know what TPDC is, it's an equivalent of UNOC in Uganda. It's a national oil company in Tanzania. And I've been working for TPDC now for 10 years plus. And before that, I worked in the private sector for 2 years, so a total of around 12 years in the industry. In the interest of time, maybe I'll just proceed with my presentation. If you want my detailed profile, you can find it on page 52 of the booklet. Can you proceed? Okay. Okay, so this is my topic. I'll talk about a prediction model for cybersecurity in petroleum infrastructure, and I'll use the Colonial Pipeline as a case study. So the objective of the study of this paper was to, in most organization risk registers or risk profile, cybersecurity is not given much priority. So part of the intention of this paper is to create that awareness, to include cybersecurity issues in the organizational risk profile. And actually, cybersecurity should be ranked very high in the organizational risk profile. You'll see later why cybersecurity is of such significance. And also to build capabilities to understand the information system ecosystems and to predict attacks. And to improve on the traditional approach, which is more on defensive and reactionary. Once something has happened is when we start to act. But if we add prediction into as one of our arsenal in fighting cyber attacks, then we can prepare for them much more better. And because in our organizations, as you know, we have limited resources, and the scope is very high on different angles which attackers could attack organizations. But once you have narrowed down, you have understood your ecosystem objectively using data, you can invest your limited resources on specific areas which are more significant. So the methodology we adopted at TPDC to develop that model I talked about was, the key of course was data. We needed a lot of data. So we used publicly available data. I'll show you the data sources. And then we defined our problem. What did we want the model to do or to predict? And then we selected a modeling approach based on our problem, which best fit our problem. And then we did feature engineering. And then we trained the model using machine learning. And we evaluated the model. And we have not reached to the stage of deploying the model. But as you can see, this is a continuous process. As more data becomes available, as you get more insights, or I'd say as you get more data from other sources, the better your model becomes. And it improves on the accuracy of predicting cyber attacks. So, as you can see over here, once you've deployed the model, we expect the model to give you insights, which you can use to make informed decisions on cybersecurity issues. but also the insights could become inputs for your next training cycle when you want to train your model. I'm trying to, to make it as simple, to understandable as simply as I can, because it's quite technical. But I'm sure you can ask me questions during the question session. So when you want to train the model, there are two approaches you can take. You can do the supervised learning for machine learning, or you can do the unsupervised. And the supervised learning is a bit more predictable, and is actually the approach we took, because it's a well-established technique, and it's more accurate. And as a computer scientist, I can understand what is going on in supervised learning as opposed to unsupervised learning. Unsupervised learning is what you hear in the media for artificial intelligence, you see. It's the more controversial part of artificial intelligence. And you see a lot of experts are complaining that artificial intelligence might one day kill us because they don't fully understand what is going on in unsupervised learning, you see. So this one, I don't want to touch it. And I'm not even qualified to do this unsupervised learning, because we don't want to unleash a monster that we don't understand into our environment. But all the way, if you are comfortable with it, you can use the unsupervised learning as well. So those are some of the algorithms that each method uses. For example, for supervised learning, you have regression analysis and classification, such as decision trees, support vector machines, and so on and so forth. For unsupervised learning, you have neural networks, singular value decomposition, k-means clustering, and hierarchical clustering. So for our case, we chose supervised learning, and specifically regression algorithm to train our model. So these were the results. Don't be scared. I'll explain what this thing means. So the data sources we used were from these places. These are publicly available data sources. The National Vulnerability Database, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, Verizon Data Breach Investigation Reports. So there are many publicly available data sources on cybersecurity which you can use to train your model, and this data is quite comprehensive. There are millions and millions of data points which you can use to train your machine learning model. So from the model, you could see that there are many variables that we are testing, but you could see that other variables had more correlation than other variables. So other variables did not have any meaningful correlation. Others had a positive correlation, others had a negative. For example, you see this variable, there's almost a positive correlation. So when you increase something, it correlates with that. So I would like to discuss some of the interesting findings we got. So we found that, for example, employee training was one of the variables, and phishing attacks was one of the variables. So we found a very strong relationship between employee training and phishing attacks, which our study shows that organizations that invest in regular employee training on how to recognize and avoid phishing attacks are less likely to experience successful cyber attacks. So that's why even at TPDC now, from what we learned from our model, we have decided to make training, user training, mandatory to every employee, to the most junior employee up to the board members, because all these people are interacting with our systems. And we also found out that the attack frequency was very much related to the industry. So there was also a strong relationship between particular industries and the number of cybersecurity incidents they had. For example, from our data, we could see that certain industries such as finance, healthcare, oil and gas are more frequently targeted by cyber attacks than others, like hospitality industries and retail. And also, we could, from our model, we could see that the threat intelligence and incident response was also another strong variable relationship. So there was a very strong correlation between threat intelligence and incident response. So organizations that invest in threat intelligence tools and services to monitor for potential threats are better equipped to respond to incidents quickly and effectively. So you can see why we need such tools. And also surprisingly, from our study, we found that also the time of day, surprisingly, there was a relationship. More cyber attacks happened during low traffic hours, like when people have left the office, and during public holidays. So actually, intuitively, you would think that on public holidays, maybe nothing is going on. But actually, other people are working to try to send you an attack. So also the attack frequency and the attack type. For example, we found that distributed denial of services attacks are more likely to occur during periods of high network traffic or system usage, while ransomware attacks were more likely to occur during off hours and during public holidays. So this is the algorithm. In the interest of time, maybe if we can meet later, I'll explain what this means. So on the model, we use quite a number of variables. They're called dependent variables, such as time of the day, type of organization, size of organizations. We use over 30 variables. And when you're modeling something, the more variables you have, the more accurate is your model to predict a cyber attack. So it's good to have more variables. And we found that the variable with the most significant variable was the industrial sector. So if there's one determinant factor that you will be attacked, is which industry are you in? And unfortunately, we're in that industry, the oil and gas industry. So our model showed an R-squared value of 0.85 or 85%. This means that the model sufficiently explains the cybersecurity incidents. So as a continued studies, we'll continue to introduce more variables, to test them, and to add them into the model to improve the R-squared. the R squared value. If you improve the R squared values, it means your model is more accurate. So we tested our model against the Colonial Pipeline hack. So the Colonial Pipeline, for those of you who don't know it, is a pipeline that runs from Houston, Texas to New York, and it carries, it's about 8,000 kilometers long, and it carries refined petroleum products. And in 2021, it was attacked by hackers, and the hackers apparently were from Russia, and they encrypted everything. So the pipeline was out of service, and people could not get oil. It caused a huge shortage of oil in the east of USA. So it was a huge thing. And the attackers, they held the data for ransom. So they encrypted everything, and they wanted a compensation of about 75 bitcoins, which at the time was about $4.4 million, so that they can restore the services. The US government tried everything, tried to restore the services. They couldn't, so they had to pay the attackers $4.4 million. And they sent them the recovery key, and they were able to proceed with services. But eventually, over time, they were able to recover some of the amount, but not all of it was recovered. So the Colonial Pipeline hack, actually, the US government has disclosed very few information. So experts have tried to put the picture together based on bits and pieces of information available to the public. So this is an estimation of what happened with the hack based on public available data as of February 2023. So there was an account, a user account in the organization, which was compromised. Like my previous colleague said, don't give your credentials to anyone. So it seems this account was compromised. I don't know how it was compromised, but it was a user account which was used to run the script. So what the script did was it executed itself, it unpacked and decrypted configuration files, because configuration files are usually encrypted in the operating system. And then it checked the privileges of the account. Once it found that the account did not have all the privileges, it upgraded the account privileges into a super user account. So once it had all the privileges, it created a mutex, it wiped the bin, it encrypted the status file, it created machine statistics, and from the machine statistics you could see all the details of the operating system. So it checks, is this system Russian? Does it use the Russian language? If no, it continues to execute. If yes, it stops. So the system doesn't want to attack a Russian software, apparently. So after that, it deletes a shadow copy, it creates machine statistics, kills the OS services, and then it checks for space in the RAM memory. If there's sufficient memory, then it drops the ransom note to say that we need so and so amount, we have encrypted all your data. And then it goes until it deletes itself and it stops. So this is what happened to the Colonial Pipeline hack. And from here, when we tested when we tested our model against what actually happened, we could see the error factor was, because the error factor checks what we've predicted against what actually happened. So when we tested it against the colonial pipeline hack, the error factor was very small. So you could see that the prediction model is doing well. It can really predict an attack. So what are the implications of all this that I've discussed? So clearly there are policy implications that are required. Example, increase of investment in cybersecurity of critical infrastructure. By critical here, I mean pipelines, power grids. For example, in my country, roughly 60% of all power is generated from natural gas. So you can imagine the predicament will be in if our pipeline is attacked. It will be a national security issue. So also another policy issue that is clearly supposed to be implemented is the international cooperation. Countries should cooperate on cyber attacks issues, because even from our study we noticed that a lot of attacks originate from outside the country. They don't originate from within. So if there's this cooperation between countries, it is easier to work on around issues of protection. And also policy around the use of cryptocurrency. You see, there's a lot of hype about cryptocurrency now, but cryptocurrency is actually the currency of preference for criminals, because once you pay them in crypto, those funds cannot be traced. So countries should be very careful around regulation on crypto to allow cryptocurrencies as a currency of transaction. Also, increased regulation. Example, mandatory security standards and incident reporting. Currently, in my country, at least they're making progress on this. There's a regulatory authority called EAGA, which is mandating some of the issues on incident reporting and security standards for public organizations, that at least public organizations should have a minimal certain security standard, and they would come to audit you to see if you are meeting the standards. Also, public awareness is key. Capacity building. Personally, I was lucky to be trained by my government to Japan for my master's degree, and specifically on these issues. So we need to train a lot of ICT specialists on areas of cybersecurity, and also public-private partnerships. Sometimes the government may not have the competencies, but because private organizations invest a lot on research and development, so if we go into partnerships, we can really share this information and build on our competencies. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Amani Dello and Mr. Alan Obalim for the nice presentations. Now I'd welcome, we're supposed to have a third presentation, Manja, Miss Manja, I think she's not around, so we'll proceed to the question and answer session, and I'd welcome the two presenters to sit in front, and then we will have our rapporteur. She can introduce herself for 1 minute. and then we proceed with the Q&A session. So please welcome, and Mr. Delo.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayan Omar from National Oil Corporation of Kenya. When I'm not doing geology, I do a bit of data, but at the presence of Mr. MIT and Amani, I will not dare talk about data. So I'll be a rapporteur for this session. Thank you.
Okay, so questions are welcome. Any questions? So maybe I'd start with myself. Thanks so much for the presentation. I think the question goes to all of you, and it's actually not a question, it's more of a comment, because we were told by Mr. Alan that we should not give our credentials, and I was in another forum, I was told that the hackers don't actually hack, they log in. So once you give your details, then that's the start of the problem. So, any other questions? Questions, welcome. Okay, yeah. Okay, we are told time is up, but we'll have 3 minutes for questions. Okay, you can start us off.
I'll shoot, then he can add some more. Well, training is as good, because you see there's a difference between training and user awareness. With training, you're plugging a gap, you're imparting skill and knowledge. So at the end of the day, someone gets to know what to do, because they say knowledge is power. And then on the other hand, with awareness, you're actually changing behavior. You're changing attitude. So if you have a workforce that tend to write their passwords and stick it on their computers, you are going to train them, or you're going to cause awareness and say, someone can easily impersonate you by actually taking your password or copying your password. Or if you're working and someone is standing behind you, they are actually seeing what you're doing or noting the keys you're typing. And so someone can play that. Also, I forget the term, but there are those softwares that actually capture everything you type. So if you're a target, and everyone actually is a target, it's said that everyone is hackable. You're only hacked when you're value, but everyone is actually hackable. And so you getting to know your position in that space helps you actually protect your assets. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. To answer your question is, the question you've posed to us is very important. And actually, it's the same question we had when we were initially going to develop this model. So we traditionally, we know a lot of issues that could be vulnerabilities for cyber attacks, weaknesses in user awareness. So what we did is we took those as dependent variables. So we have a lot, about 30 variables, different things, you know, and we wanted to see which one is the biggest contributor to cyber attacks. So to answer your question, user awareness is one of the high-ranking variables. So it means it's one of the most important issues in the organization. But there are many more others. And I'll be happy to share our findings to see those other things that vulnerabilities in the organization. Thank you.
Still on the human element, of course we all have passwords and etc. The encouragement is that if your system support multiple factors, like the two-factor authentication, you could actually adopt that because chances are high someone can get your password and impersonate you. But if you add a second factor, and the second factors are based on, I think, 3 modules or 4, what you know is your password, who you are. Who you are is like your retina, something that's unique about you, maybe your fingerprints, and then probably there's also what you have. What you have is like your phone. When you put in your password, you get a second factor as an SMS with a token that probably expires. And then the new one again in that whole identification paradigm is where you are. So certain applications can actually authenticate you with where you are. Say, if you always access your bank account from Tanzania and you go out of Tanzania and then you're trying to get into your internet banking and then it asks where you are, maybe location, and it points Uganda, it's not going to allow because it knows someone maybe has stolen your phone and it's another location. So you could also adopt multi-factor authentication as a way of preserving, so that if your password, what you know, is compromised, the other models are not compromised. Yeah, so you're also safe that way.
Okay, for the interest of time, I'll welcome one more question. Okay, it seems there are no more questions. So if you want to know more about cybersecurity, you can talk to the 2 gentlemen afterwards or during the course of the session. And thanks everyone for attending. And I think there's some token from Our Lady. Okay, thanks so much. The session is over.